Alrighty, welcome to Junkyard Theory, folks. And tonight's guest is somebody who has been cutting for quite a while. His resume includes films such as Conan the Barbarian, The Expendables, and quite a lot of horror, such as The Nun, Bye Bye Man, and quite some more. And just before we got on the line, he was just telling me about another interesting horror slash sci-fi project he's probably going to be working on. So let's hear it from the man himself, Ken Blackwell. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
Likewise.
Good.
And it's great to have you, man. We've been
Yeah.
planning this for quite a while, since
Yeah.
last year, and finally managed to get a hold of you. So that's good.
That's my problem.
Ken, I'd like to hear about your origins into the film industry. How did that come about?
Sure. I was going to the first year of college. I was going to a small state university in New York, and I could see that what was around me. I saw people that would like graduate from that school and stuff that they had trouble finding work, or they ended up just staying in that city and working. So I knew that I needed to branch out. And so I applied and I got into New York University and transferred there and got my degree there, and plus met like a lot of people and worked on a lot of things. But mainly I started out shooting stuff camera, being the cinematographer on a bunch of student films and spec commercials, and then I ended up doing an internship for a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, Barbara Koppel. I don't know if you know who she is. She directed and won the Academy Award for the movie Harlan County, USA, about coal miners that were on strike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And at the time, she was making another film it ended up being called American Dream, about meat packers that were on strike. And she also won the Academy Award for that. So I was like their everyday, like PA editorial intern, working for free, just getting like credit. And you're only supposed to be there for like, 6 weeks or whatever. And I ended up staying for like a year and a half. I would just still go in every day after classes or whatever, whenever they needed me. But generally, I would be there every day. And I got to have a lot of like fun experiences with her and her crew. And then just one day, one of the assistant editors said, we should like get you into doing, something else, because here you're only going to learn so much. And so she had a contact with a friend who was working in the sound department on another movie, and they needed an apprentice to come and help them out with like various things. And of course, it was for free again. I wasn't going to get paid, but I was like, sure, I'll do it. And through that is where I met a few people that eventually I ended up getting hired and getting a real paid job for. But so it was just through doing those things and meeting people. That seems to be the most important thing, is just meeting people, working with them, and showing everyone that you work hard and you aren't, you're focused on what you want to do. And so through that is how I ended up coming out to California. I ended up getting on this movie. It was that concert film Rattle and Hum that U2 made. We were shooting it in New York, and nobody was sure or not whether it was going to stay in New York and finish. So people were hesitant to take the job because they didn't want to take that job and then miss out on something else when this one was going to leave. So that was part of the interview. The guy told me, he's like, if you take this job, you have to stick with it. We don't know what's going to happen, but we could end up finishing it somewhere else, wherever that somewhere else might be. Are you willing to go as well? And I was like, sure. I was like, yeah, I'll do it. So yeah, like 5 months later, one week they were like, okay, we're moving out to Los Angeles to finish the show. The band wants to record out there, and we're going to finish editing there. Okay, next week. So on Monday, bring your suitcases to work. I was like, okay. So we did. That following week, I brought 2 suitcases to work, and at the end of the day, they put us on a plane, flew, landed, got taken to a place to stay, and then somebody picked me up in the morning and brought me into the new place to work. It was like, we never missed a beat because we had been shipping stuff the whole time. So that was kind of how it all started out, because it's all just meeting and working with people. Because after that, I ended up getting, I actually went back to New York after that job. We were out in LA for 11 months, finished. I still had things in New York. I went back, and then I had been gone so long, it was hard to get back into the swing of working there. And I think I only worked like 5 days in 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy Tom, who had hired me on the YouTube thing, he moved back to LA and found work right away. And he was like, hey, you should just come back out here. There's like a lot of work. I'm sure you'll find something. So I did. And 2 weeks later, found a job and just stayed here. Yeah.
It's really cool what you said. Like, you've spent well beyond the allocated 6 months working on that particular project, basically. And
Yeah.
I think that's something, if you are a student of filmmaking, or if you want to become a filmmaker, it's something that is paramount to, I guess, your success. Being resilient and having that passion for the task. So when it comes to editing, how do you think those qualities have helped you out?
I think they've helped out because it's not a fast process. You have to have a lot of patience, and every day you're moving forward just a little bit. You think you're moving forward a lot, but you're not. You can never guess where you're going to be with the project in a month from now.
True.
You always look back and go, oh, why didn't we do that back then? So there's a lot of, and that's because there's a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of, there's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of things to try, because not all the time what's on paper and what they shoot line up. And it might read really, really well, but then when they shoot it, these things happen. It's like magical. Like these things happen that were like something that like I said, like reads really well, and you think it's going to work, but then when it's shot, and not that it's shot poorly, but everything is shot great, but for some reason the audience doesn't buy something.
True. It doesn't connect.
Yeah. So you have to kind of figure out how to rework things and eliminate or add to sell it. So there's a lot of that goes on. So there's a lot of patience that you have to have. And people always tell me, I don't know how you sit there for, how many hours a day and just look at the same thing over and over again. I'm like, no, it's fun. So,
editors would understand, essentially what you're doing is, you're rewriting the film for the final time.
Yeah.
And, although it was written on paper, like you said, things change while you're shooting, and then you realize, something that could have worked on paper doesn't really work well on screen. So, correct me if I'm wrong. I personally think that an editor is the final person who, brings the director's vision out in an orderly manner, and they're the ones who construct the narrative at the end. Sometimes they end up saving the movie.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, you just I never look at it that way though. The director of the movie, I was just in New Orleans, helping out on something, and he turned to me one day and he goes, "Why would you want to do this? Like, what made you want to like come and do this?" And
What
I'm
did you
like,
say?
I said to him, I'm like, I watched your movie and I saw that I could help you, that I could help. And that's what I like to do. And I saw that I could. And so I said, like, yeah, I'll do it. And he was like, "Oh, that's cool." Because, I mean, that's basically why. I mean, I just saw it was a cool movie and just needed a little, another point of view. Just like that happens a lot. I mean, you need that help because you get when you're there every day and
Hmm.
you're alone and you're you're working on it, you can get lost in because it's like tunnel vision, like you're just seeing this. So you need somebody to
Yeah.
come in and look from this way and look from that way, and just like with a few other ideas or something like that. So it's all cool, and it was fun. But yeah, so what were we talking about? Got lost.
That's fine. Because
Yeah.
the point that you mentioned, where people kind of like get lost when you're working long
Yeah.
hours. Paul Hirsch, who edited Star Wars, he was on
Hmm.
the show some time back, and he specifically mentioned this, and he refers to it as snow blind, I guess,
Yeah. It's a
running snow blind.
good analogy.
So yeah,
So that's
yeah,
why I'm
and
always like showing stuff like, if an assistant is around or something like that, or somebody just like, before I'll show it to the director, like we'll look at it and because somebody will always say like, "Oh, look at that,"
mm,
because and I'll go, "Oh, yeah, we'll fix it or whatever." So it's always good to have like second set of eyes, take a look at something. So after you've been working on something for so long, for like 8, 9 months, it's still always a good idea to have, another set of eyes. That's why they do like preview screenings, because then you have
mm,
400 eyes looking at it and giving you shocking news that you'd never thought to,
true.
and you get those cards or listen to sometimes they have like 20 people in a focus group talking, and you hear the stuff they say, you're like, oh my god, we never thought of that, or or it works.
Mm. When do you decide to, make a particular change after a test screening? Like, let's say you have 400 people, and if one person says something, does that weigh more than 20 people saying something? How do you decide
Sometimes,
what changes?
sometimes it does.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it does. For an example, um, on the movie Hancock with Will Smith,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was an assistant visual effects editor on that, and we had a preview in, I believe it was in Dallas, Texas, and the original beginning of that movie had Will Smith was in a bar, and these two women came in, and he took one of them home and slept with them,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like kind of this funny scene of cutting inside and outside the trailer, and then he discovers that she's not even 18 years old yet. She was like 17, or she was going to be 18 in 4 days. That
Oh
was the
shit.
story. So he was like, "Uh-oh," and then she like runs out, and that's what he got in trouble for that. He was going to get arrested for that, and that's why he ended up in jail. I believe in the original script, he ended up in jail because of that. One of the preview, one of the people in the focus group for that preview was like, you know, I counsel sexual assault survivors, and I don't, that may be funny to some, but to a lot of other people, it's not.
Mm.
That one comment, that everybody listened. They were like, you know what, you're right, and we went back and changed the beginning of the movie, so that doesn't happen. So the reason that he went to So that was
Wow.
never part of the story, and
Yeah.
we had to come up for another reason for him to get arrested. And so, yeah, I mean, one person said one thing, so and it changed the movie.
So did that mean that you guys had to like go back out there and shoot new scenes for the film, or
No,
did you work that out
no,
in the edit?
it could just be recut.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think I remember. I believe they had to have maybe Nancy Grace was in the movie. She was a
Mm-hmm.
reporter for CNN at the time. She had a show. I think we had to have her shoot something extra to say
Okay.
something extra or some ADR or something for it, if I remember right. But yeah, I mean, it was just, one person said one thing in the studio and everybody else listened because it was a good point. They didn't want to put the movie out and offend people or be like, not not correct.
Yeah.
And so yeah, but then, other times, um, one director told me he just reads all the people that didn't like the movie, all the cards.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we listen to the focus group, then we go back and we would read all the cards for the people. We would put all the ones that people liked the movie. We just put them aside. If it was
Mm-hmm.
good and excellent, we just didn't even look at them really. It was all the ones that rated it like poor or fair. We would just look at those and go, okay, what made these people not like the movie? And try to go through and figure it out. Like, what were the things that would make that person like the movie or enjoy it and work on those items.
It's interesting how far studios kind of go to ensure that the final product that they put up in front of a screen, when it's released, kind of caters to a mass as mass an audience as possible. So
Yeah.
I guess even when it comes to the edit, there's so much that you guys can play around with, like by reassembling scenes or cutting maybe early or entire removing stuff aside. Like there's so much that you can do with editing. Like it's like the final power that dictates uh, the end result of a movie, I guess.
Yeah.
So
I mean, most of that even is just making sure that the story works and
mm,
logic works. And there's no laughs where you don't want laughs.
mm,
Sometimes you get a laugh and you're like, oh, and it's a good thing, but other times it's not. So you have to work your way around that. Um, but in most of the movies, I mean, it is what it is, and you can't really change the movie that much.
true.
You can somewhat. You can change little portions of it, but without reshooting large amounts, I've always found that the movie's not going to really, anybody coming in and just recutting what already exists most of the time is not, unless it's like was just done really badly, really poorly. You know,
Hmm.
most of the time the theme of the movie and the story isn't going to change. So if like people don't like the story, don't like what went on, no matter what you do, they're not going to like it. So
Yeah.
and what I'm trying to get around to is like what happens sometimes are movies go into production before the script is completely finished, and they'll keep doing a lot of rewrites as you go, and those tend to be the films that have the most issues with the story, with because if people don't understand the story, then they kind of like sign off and they don't like the movie. But if you
True.
understand it and you like it, then you like enjoy your time watching it and you'll be okay. So it's just about making the movie enjoyable for everybody that's going to watch it. You want everybody to enjoy it, not just a little focused audience. So,
Pretty much everybody I've had on here has always, come back to this point: story, narrative, story, narrative. It's
Yeah.
always back to that. Like that's the starting point, and sometimes also uh, the ending point as well. And
Yeah,
has there
because
ever
you.
been? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I
You
was
can
saying.
have a lot of cool shots, but
Mhm.
you can have a whole bunch of cool shots, but if the story isn't working, people
Yeah,
just sign off. I mean, I'm the same way. I sit down and I watch something, and if I'm in like 5 or 6 minutes, 10 minutes into it, and I'm just like, "What is going on here?" Then I'll tune out. I'll pick up my iPad and start reading, and or just change the channel. There's
yeah.
so much to choose from these days.
And one of the reasons, like, I really wanted to get you on board was because, like I told you before, your resume is so full with action and mostly horror movies. And horror is such it's a genre where it can be either hit or miss, kind of like comedy too. And
Hmm.
I think I remember it was Spielberg when he was talking about Jaws. He said that uh, whether the shark was scary or not depended sometimes like on one single frame. Have you experienced this when you were cutting any of your movies?
Um, well, I think maybe what he means is not possibly one single frame, but when to cut and when not to cut,
Hmm.
and timing,
Yeah.
um, possibly. Um, because, yeah, I mean, if you edit something and something seems off and you add a frame here or there, it's all about perception with your eye. So if something moves in the frame that bothers your eye and where your eye follows, that can be distracting. So you try to make the cuts not distracting. But a lot of, like, in horror is what you can't see, what you can hear, or what you can't hear, and when to cut away and when not to cut away. Um, so I think that maybe is what he may have been referring to is
Probably. I
timing.
and
Is timing.
yeah, mostly with the timing. Yeah, because I think he was referring to like the animatronic shark that they had,
Yeah.
and something that his editor, I can't remember the name, but yeah, it was about whether or not they showed more of the shark or less. So yeah, what you said is right. Like
Yeah, because
whether
in
to yeah.
horror movies, a lot of it is about, like I said, like what you can't, what the characters can't see, and what
Hmm.
you as the audience can't see, but think is happening. So a lot of that is like a lot of a really good horror movie gets it psychological in the audience's head. If you can make them scared about what we might show them, then you've done your job. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything that you kind of like keep in mind before you approach a film with like a specific genre, maybe horror, action, or sci-fi? Is there anything that you keep in mind?
Other movie wise, you mean?
Not necessarily like how do I put this? Uh, any guidelines or rules or stuff, or do you just approach it
Not
as a blank
really.
slate?
Yeah. Just as a blank slate, like, okay, what do I have here?
Hmm.
And I'll watch the dailies and once, and then I'll watch them again and break stuff down, and then I'll look at any notes, or maybe the director's like sent me a note or something like that, just to like see what their intention is in the scene. Because it's not always like, sometimes they shoot a lot of setups, and they get an idea after they've done like 4 or 5 setups, and have changed their mind about how they want to do something. So you've got all this footage, and you're like, okay, and then you see them start doing something else, and you're like, oh, all right. So you kind of figure out like what's going on, and usually it's pretty self evident that like, okay, they were doing this, they were doing X, Y, and Z, but somewhere along the line they discovered, oh, if we do this, it might be better. So you got to kind of like figure that out on your own sometimes. But sometimes, that one thing might be just like one take somewhere. They're like, try this, and they do one
Hmm.
other thing, and that one other thing is what the director wants to see. But if nobody tells you, then you don't know, and you just kind of like make the scene work. And that's sort of what a lot of directors want you to do, is
Hmm.
just without their input make make this work, because
Yeah.
you might do something that they might not think of, back and forth. So they want to see what somebody else comes up with, and then
True.
later on, he or she will go, oh, you know what, I shot that. Let's try that. And we're like, okay, and you go back and do that. That's what getting back to that whole thing about of you know, there's a lot of experimentation that goes on throughout. That's why it
Yeah.
takes so long.
True. What's the longest
So,
that you worked on any project?
oh boy, um, some of those action movies when I was an assistant. Nowadays they don't shoot that long. Like
I
that
mean,
movie,
I think I'm asking more about like how long. What's the longest you spend in the editing room, like cutting up a project?
month wise.
Yeah, month-wise.
Oh, like that movie. Um, let's see. Probably the longest was about a year and
Mm-hmm.
4 months.
That's a pretty long time.
Yeah, that includes shooting.
Okay.
Yeah.
How how do you maintain that the enthusiasm, up until the very end? Does it ever get hard?
Uh, only when it only gets hard when everybody else doesn't know what they want to do,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of um, delay from everybody else. Everybody else meaning maybe like the producers don't know, or the studio hasn't an idea what they want you to do, or there's this lull that happens where you're like waiting for feedback, and it takes a while to get that feedback or them to make a decision on if they're going to shoot some more or if they're going to want to do these visual effects. So I think it's just the moments where when you're always moving forward and you're doing something, but then there's the moments where you're waiting.
Hmm.
And I guess it's the waiting, right?
Fair enough. Uh, And when it comes to horror projects, you edited The Nun, so that's part of like the Conjuring universe, and it's a very successful franchise. So
Hmm.
coming down to franchise movies, are there any conventions that the studio kind of wants you to follow, or do they give you like free reign? How does that work out?
No, well, that particular movie, my friend Michelle Aller was editing it first, and
Mm-hmm.
she had scheduled to leave to go. She had already been scheduled to leave to go edit Shazam, and so then,
Hmm.
and so she'd already been on the movie, I think, for like 9 months maybe,
Gotcha.
and so she had to leave because they went over schedule because they we did like 2 or 3 reshoots on that. So then we overlapped a little bit in like December or January for like a couple weeks, and then she left, and then I finished it for like the next 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just so you have the history of that, and because Michelle did a lot of great work on that, and so uh, you pretty much have free reign to edit the material how you think is what is best to make the story work. There's no like edict of you can't do this or you can't do that. I mean, you try not to make more visual effects shots that are going to cost money. That's
Fair enough.
basically that goes unsaid in
Hmm.
everything. You try not to make more visual effects shots. I mean, if you need them to tell the story and it's going to help and blah blah blah, then you do it. But if
Yeah.
you just don't do that stuff just to be cool, you don't need 4 of those shots. Can you just use 1? Yeah, of course you
Mm.
can. So you just try to keep that in mind while you're working. But nobody tells you that. That's just something you should know. Um, but otherwise, no. I mean, the we did a reshoot and then had a test screening, and then they decided to do another reshoot. So there was time in between the reshoots where um, we experimented a lot with the different structure of the movie,
Hmm.
um, different lengths of scenes, inside and outside the castle. Then once they shot new material, um, we would just go over that with the producers and decide. Like there was one particular scene, 2 scenes that didn't end up in the final movie, just because it was like it felt like they were out of the universe of
Hmm.
the whole genre, the Conjuring universe. There was anything like them in any of the other movies, so those scenes were not. We didn't particularly need them anyway, but
Gotcha.
those were held out of the movie. So I mean, that's the thing is like everybody just wanted a really cool movie, so where everybody was just working toward that, and we were just doing whatever was necessary so that people would enjoy it and it would stick to the the that universe that they'd
Gotcha.
created.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About visual effects shots, you said you try not to, increase the number of VFX shots that are needed.
Mm-hmm.
And working with VFX shots, like you don't always, when you start out, you don't see like the end product. How do you know whether, like, okay, you have like, so let's say like an assembly of a scene, and how do you know whether the VFX that comes in later on works according to the edit that you've already made, or
Well,
other times that you have to change
most of the time we do see the end product when
first
we're
before
on.
you edit? Okay.
No, like before we're done.
Mm-hmm.
Like as we go, those get turned over and worked on, and maybe like a month later we get a version of it and to comment on
Gotcha.
and
Okay.
work with. So it's an ongoing process that leads up to the final mix. So by the time the final mix happens, there's a certain date that everything is supposed to be in so that it's actually mixed with the finished visual effect. But I mean, you always, like for me, I will cut something and probably overdo it with some of the visual effects shots, and then like pare it down on the next pass. Like, okay, we don't need to see that twice. We only need to see that once, type thing.
Yeah.
So, um, so, but on like the movie I was just on in New Orleans, I won't see the visual effects um, at all because we're nobody's working on the movie anymore except for the sound department and the visual effects, and
Mm-hmm.
so um, they will. I believe the director will be looking at them remotely, and that's it.
Gotcha.
So, but there was nothing like super complicated that you know people weren't like we're not needed there. You know, to recut anything based on a visual effects shot. not doing what we needed to do. All the visual
Yeah.
effects are pretty much straightforward where they should just drop in.
Hmm.
But on like large, big budget visual effects action movies and stuff like that, you're always making changes based on the visual effects shots that come back. If you sometimes there's stuff in the handles of the shot, like they work on the shot plus like maybe 10 or 8 frames at the head and the tail
Before and
that
after.
weren't in the
Yeah.
cut.
Hmm.
So there might be some cool stuff that in the handles that you might want to add,
Right.
have that in the movie. So
Yeah.
you're always making those decisions and stuff.
Do you ever edit with temp music or like cut to a beat? Has that ever happened? Like, or does the music come in afterwards?
Afterward, yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, if there's music in the scene, yeah. Like if there's something supposed to be playing that's part of the story, yes. But in general, no. We try not to because I think it's more important to make the scene work without music before you put music into it, because music can sometimes fool you into thinking that it's working. So, you know what I mean?
Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, if you take a scene, and on its own, without music, maybe the story of the scene isn't really working that well.
Sure.
Okay? But if you put music to it, suddenly like everybody's like, oh, yeah, this is okay. And you go by. But then you're down the road in the movie a little bit and you're confused. And you're like, oh, why don't I get this? Why don't I get what's going on? Well, it's because that scene really didn't work. It really didn't convey the information that it needed to. And now you're down later in the movie and you think, and you're lost. And it's because that scene didn't work.
Makes
But
sense.
you had music on it that made it, you go, oh yeah, this is cool. All right. So music can like kind of cover up issues. And sometimes you have to do that because you have no other choice. But so my goal every time is to try to make everything work without music. And in horror movies in general, in the beginning, and I've been guilty of this too, is putting too much music in the movie. And then when you find that when you strip it away, it's scarier. When there's no music, something's scarier than with music.
True.
So I try not to do it.
Less is more sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, we worked with one director. I was an assistant on a movie, and he refused. He told the editors, like, I don't want to ever hear any music, ever. And they were like, he was like, until we give it to the composer. And they were like, okay. So then, of course, we had a preview, and the studio was like, you guys have music, temp music, don't you? And they were like, maybe in secret. And like then they had to tell the director, they were like, when we preview this movie, we have to have temp music. We can't show the movie to 400 people and not have any music. And he was like, okay, but I'm not going to listen to it. So they had to have a music editor come in and like temp the movie really quickly so we could mix it and get it out for the screening. But yeah, so there's some people that don't want to be influenced by it because temp music can influence you into thinking something is working when it's not. When it's music is supposed to enhance what's going on, not try to like cover up inconsistencies.
Fair enough. Yeah. And what's the most fun you had working on a project?
The most fun,
Yeah.
probably. I think we had the most fun working on this movie called True Romance.
Mm-hmm.
The Tony Scott
Why?
movie. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think we had the most fun working on that. It was a good time. It was just a good time. I mean, we were like, um, they. I was an assistant, and there was two other assistants, and eventually a third assistant, and we were all working at like this office in Hollywood, and then I mean it was just a good time. And we had to move to this other place, and the camaraderie and everything between everybody, I
Mm-hmm.
think was a lot of fun. And even with the director, Tony. And I remember one day we saw he was like worried about something, and we were like, "What's wrong?" And this was a Saturday, and he was like, my dogs are loose. I can't find them." So we literally all just shut down the editing room and all went out to help look for his dogs. I was on the beach somewhere in Malibu, like walking up and down the beach looking for dogs. So that's, I mean, and it turned out his neighbor had them, saw that they were loose, and put them in his garage and didn't call him or something until later. But it was little things like that that make the process fun, I guess. But like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the movie was fun. All the little characters and people that would come by were fun, and I think we just had a good time on that movie.
How early on do you join any particular project? Like, is it pre-production itself, or like production and maybe sometimes in post? So, uh, usually, most of the time, when do you join a project? And yeah, walk me through that process. Like, how does it happen?
It can differ. Like
Mm-hmm.
this particular movie that starts tomorrow, um, I believe I had the interview back in late April,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in Louisiana, and then a week later I was hired. So, and they don't start shooting until tomorrow, so that's a good like month and a half
Yeah.
prior. Which rarely that's the way it works. Usually it's a couple weeks, sometimes a couple days. If it's to go on and like help out, um, sometimes you get called and you're in there the next day. So like Louisiana was, um, I got called on a Wednesday and I was on the plane on Saturday. Um, just for logistics, I would have been on a plane probably Wednesday night if COVID didn't exist, because I had to get tested and
Yeah.
get the results and then get on the plane. Um, so yeah, it's all based on the situation and whether they sometimes movies forget that they need an editor, and a couple days before they're like, oh, and then they start calling around. Like I remember I was working with this one editor, and he got a call one day, and then he was on the phone, and I heard him. He was like, uh-huh, uh-huh, and then he just hung the phone up and started laughing. And I was, what's the matter? What's so funny? He's like, these guys looking for an editor for their movie. And I just said, well, when do you start shooting? And they said tomorrow. So I just hung up. Because he's like, if they can't think ahead of time to hire an editor, then what do you think that whole process is going to be like?
Mm-hmm. True. And so most
It
productions
depends on
are.
the situation.
Hmm, you froze there for a moment, so I
Oh,
kind of
sorry.
lost you.
Yeah,
But
it's most of the time it's based on the situation and where they're at in the process. But if it's like before they're going to shoot, it's anywhere from a month and a half to a couple weeks. And sometimes in advance, with the same director over and over again. He's like,
Sure.
we're going to shoot this movie in September, so keep yourself available. Then you can kind of like, gauge things.
Sure. And so most studio movies, I guess, like they do take the pains to hire an editor from like right from the get go. But
Yeah.
yeah, and how do you think an editor being there, while the production is while the film is in production, affects the narrative that's being shot sometimes? Like you guys get the dailies and sometimes assemble scenes and send it back to the director. And have you noticed like changes occurring while shooting as well? Like basically
Well,
your edit influencing the film as it's being shot.
not necessarily. Most of the
Hmm.
time, it's all just to make sure they're getting everything you need. You might glaringly see like, oh my God, like everybody keeps looking over there at something and you didn't get a shot of whatever it is they're looking at. And they're like, oh my God. And then they'll go put that on the list.
But
So it's
doesn't
mainly,
shortlisting help that?
yeah, but like I said, on the day when you're there
Hmm.
shooting, a lot of things change based
True.
on the set and what the actors will or won't do. I
Hmm.
mean, or what they start doing that you never anticipated that they would do. Like,
Yeah.
so suddenly everybody starts referring or looking at something that wasn't planned. And so they don't shoot that POV or wherever they're looking at or something.
Yeah.
And so you got to like mention that.
True.
Or um, something just doesn't work. And usually they know that something just doesn't work. And to they ask you to put something together so they can look at it so they can see maybe it does, or that'll give them an idea to shoot something to make it work. That's
Hmm.
usually why you're on while shooting is happening, but also so that to keep the schedule, so that when they're done shooting in a week or so, you can show the director a cut and then start working with them. Whereas if they don't bring somebody on until half the shoot is gone on, or they shoot the whole movie without an editor, then you've got to sit around and wait for them
Yeah.
to put it together while you're done shooting and everybody's just waiting. Like, okay, you done yet? You done yet?
Hmm.
And so you end up rushing, you know?
Which is a very bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've been in that situation before where they I replaced somebody and then they were like, okay, we don't want you to look at what they did. We want you to start over from scratch. And I'm like, are you kidding? And they're like, no, no. I'm like, okay, all right. So you start, and then after 5 days, you get a call. So when do you think you'll be able to show the movie to so and so? And you're like, in a month? And they're like, what? Why is it taking so long? I'm like, because you told me to start over again, like, and not look at anything the other person did. So
Yeah.
of course I don't listen to them. I look at what the other person did because I'm like, okay, what was bothering them?
Hmm.
So I would cut a scene, and then I would look at them, and I'd be like, okay, it's not that much different. And then I'm like, so I don't know what it was. Usually it's a personality thing. I don't know, but again, I had to argue with them after 14 days. I'd be like, look, I'm like, in 14 days, I remember I was halfway through the movie, which was like probably a world record. And they were like, well, how much longer do you think it's going to take? I'm like, 14 more days since I'm like halfway through. And they're like, what? No. And I'm like, that's probably what it's going to take. Okay, well, let's talk the end of the week and see where you're at. Okay. And of course, then they never call the end of that week because they know they're wrong. They're just trying to like, they're just being impatient and put pressure on you for no reason at all. When it was all their idea to do it this way. So yeah. You just kind of gotta go with the flow and like let people be crazy around you who are crazy and just deal with it. You know, be calm. Okay, you want me to go this way? Okay, we'll go that way. And then somebody else comes around and goes, "Oh no, I didn't want you to go that way. You should have gone that way. Who told you to do that way?" Your partner. You know, so there's a lot of that happens. You just have to have patience and shrug it off.
Have you ever worked with simultaneously with somebody else, like a co-editor?
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
How does that process work for you? How has that worked? Like, with the style of editing, I guess. Like, do people cutting something, it kind of like tends to change?
Well, plus I've worked on, even as an assistant on a lot of those movies I worked on. There were more than one editor, so I was always used to that. So, like on the Expendables, there were two of us, me and Paul Harb, and we just, you know, every day like dailies would come in, and we, you know, he would be like, "I want to do this scene." I'm like, "Okay," and some days I would be like, "I want to do that scene." Okay, we would just split things up and do them. Because the goal at that point is just to get everything done and put together and then look at it and make sure everything's working as a story. So, you know, while, you know, there was one scene that took me like 3 or 4 days just to watch the dailies. There's so much, one sequence. So while I'm doing that, he's doing other stuff that's coming in. So we're not getting behind. Because it's true, there's like, you know, this one big sequence. You've got 4 days just to like watch stuff and like figure things out. Then another 4 days. That's like 8 to 10 days go by where other stuff would be piling up. So since there's somebody else there, it's not piling up.
Yeah.
So that's where
I remember watching this movie, Expendables, back, I think it was like 11 years ago in the theater, and just thinking like, that's a ton of coverage, like for pretty much like most of the action scenes. Like that's a shit ton of coverage, and it always fascinated me. Like, how do you guys, go through all of that footage and pick out which ones you're gonna work with? It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just basically breaking down big action scenes into beats. So you have all the pieces together for those beats and like making it work, like what's the best thing to see? Like, when do you have to see a foot on the accelerator, or like something pulled or whatever like that to make it exciting. There were so many great choices. That sequence, the sequence I was referring to, it took 4 days to watch everything, was the one where Jason Statham goes out of the airplane and they like bomb that dock. Yeah. There was a lot of, and there were so many cool shots of aerial shots of them in the air and things like that. Plus the timing of everything that was going on to bring it all together in a logical way, because then the whole sequence ends with Stallone running along the dock and jumping and grabbing the plane and it taking it off outside. So there was a lot of timing that went on and figuring out what the visual effects were going to be. So yeah, I mean, it took a while.
Who worked on the basketball court fight scene?
Paul.
Oh, was it Paul? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember that being pretty punchy.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah,
it was one of those standout moments. But yeah,
that was
totally fun movie.
Yeah.
I was really bummed when the third movie was rated PG-13.
Yeah, they got into this whole thing for, the studios do, and for a good reason. I mean, they want to make the most money, so they want to make it so the most people can go see it. So that upsets, a hardcore audience who wants a good R, but then the other people can't go see it. So I kind of got to get it in the middle. And I think the ratings board has gotten a little more lenient on what they'll let go in a
Mhm.
PG-13 these days.
True.
So
Yeah. You tend to see some pretty dark shit passed off as PG-13
I
too.
know, I
Yeah.
know. That's why I'm always surprised when they come back and they're like, "No, that makes it an R." I'm like, really? Have you seen some of the stuff that is PG-13?
So when do you guys get the rating for the movie? And if it's not what what the studio decide, uh, what's the turnaround on that?
Normally that'll happen just before you're supposed to lock, or you have like your last, what you think is your last preview. They'll
Hmm.
also send that to the ratings board to look at. They schedule a time and send that to them to look at and get feedback. Um, I mean, most of the time it's pretty straightforward, but again, there are some surprises here and there.
So it's about mostly shaving things away, I'm assuming.
Uh, well, like let's say on that movie, The Bye Bye Man was originally
Hmm.
an R, and we finished in August, early early August, I believe, and then um, I got a call I think I could be getting the dates wrong, but I know there was a month or two where we thought we were finished, and then the studio decided that they were getting more positive feedback when they were marketing a PG-13 type trailer.
Hmm.
So they decided um, they wanted to change the rating from an R to PG-13, which was um, it was a long process, but it wasn't hard. It was just long because they wouldn't tell you exactly what you needed to do to make this PG-13. You just had to like experiment and then send it to them. So the first thing we did was just take out all the swear words except for one. We left one in,
Hmm.
and because you can have one,
Yeah.
and so we just took them all out and left the one, and that's it, and sent it back to them. And of course, they were like, we didn't get past the first 3 minutes, guys. The first 3 minutes make you an R. We're not going to even like comment on the rest of the movie. We're just telling you, like, you know. So we're like, okay. So then we had to recut the beginning of the movie. It used to be one big long Steadicam shot for
Hmm.
like 3.5, 4 minutes. We had to cut it up and take out like flying blood, stains of blood on the wall, seeing somebody get shot. So there were a lot of little things that we had to do. The color of the fire had to change, like all
The,
these little things, like
the
because
color of the fire.
yeah, because the color of natural fire, of course, is like real fire. But
Yeah.
if you change the color of the flame to blue, then it's sort of like a fantasy.
Okay.
I know the logic is like, I don't
Yeah.
know where it comes from, but little things like that would get it by them. Yeah. So
That's
there were a
great. That's crazy.
whole bunch of things in different scenes had to be like tweaked just to make it finally a PG-13. And they were like, I remember the ratings board said, they were like, we don't think you're going to be able to do this. We think you're like wasting your time. We don't think you're going to be able to change this from an R to a PG-13 based on what we've seen. But after a few months, it did. So I think the studio finally had to step in and say, guys, come on. And then they were like, okay.
It's crazy, like how many elements can end up changing the final part of a movie, right?
Hmm.
Well, Ken, any advice to upcoming film editors, people who want to start their career in film editing?
Just starting out, just like edit whatever you can. If it's not your own stuff, like seek out like at film schools. Like I'm sure people are always looking for somebody to edit their projects, even if you're doing it for free. Just like because that's what I did, and just keep editing as much as you can. That would be my best advice, is just keep doing it, because in doing that you'll just keep meeting more people, and it's all about networking and working with people, and then practicing the craft, like just like anything else. Just keep practicing and meeting people. Yeah.
Brilliant. Ken, thank you so much for joining
Oh,
us
you're
today.
welcome. Thank you.
Awesome.
Glad we made it
Uh,
happen.
yeah, something that took, I guess, more than 6 months of prep.
There you go. That's how long it takes. Yeah.
Yeah, but let's do this again sometime, probably.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you so
Anytime.
much again, man. Thank you so
You're
much
welcome.
again, and let's keep in touch. And that is
Will
it for
do.
tonight, folks. And thank you for joining us. Till next time, this is Junkyard Theory, folks.